Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's meeting of the Highways and Transport Overview Scrutiny Committee. This meeting is being broadcast live via YouTube and it will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Apologies have been received from Mrs. Maggie Wright, Councillor Maggie Wright, and Councillor Tony Gillard. We also note that we have Councillor Craig Smith present as the substitute for Councillor Gillard. Thank you for stepping in. Item 1. Minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of November 2022. I assume you've all had a copy of the minutes and anybody got any issues with the minutes? So I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on 3rd of November 2022 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Agreed? Thank you. Item 2, question time. I have received no questions from members of the public. Item 3, questions asked by members under Standing Orders 7.3 and 7.5. I've received no questions from members. Item 4, I have not been notified of any urgent items. Item 5, declaration of interests in respect of items on the agenda. Does any member have any interests that they wish to declare?
Thank you, Chair. It will relate to agenda item 11, special educational needs school transport service. I have a non-registrable interest in that agenda, primarily because my wife is employed by the County Council in special educational needs services, but this item does not directly relate to any or affect the financial or other well-being of my staff. Thank you, Chair.
Any other members? No, thank you. Item 6, declarations of the party whip in accordance with overview and scrutiny procedure rule 16. Are there any declarations of the party whip? I haven't received any. No, thank you. Item 7, presentation of petitions under Standing Order 35. No petitions have been received. Item 8 on today's agenda is the report on the Council's medium-term financial strategy, MTFS, as set out in pages 9 to 26 of the agenda pack. Can I welcome to the meeting the Cabinet Lead Member, Councillor O'Shea, the Director of Environment and Transport, Anne Carruthers, Assistant Director, Declan Keegan, and Susan Baum, Finance Business Partner to the meeting for this item. The structure for considering the report is set out on the separate sheet which has been circulated to members. I don't think I'm supposed to read that bit out. I will now invite the Director and Lead Member to briefly introduce the report before we scrutinise the proposals. Thank you.
Good afternoon and thank you, Chair. If it's all right with you, Chair, I'll take you through the revenue side of the financial position and the MTFS for the highway and transport services. So the overall revenue budget for highway and transport services for the authority is in table 1 under paragraph 5, and you'll see for the coming year the net budget is 60 million, and over the 4-year MTFS period that rises to 63 million. Just for information, however, the gross position is 74 million because we do have various grants and income that I'll come on to later. A breakdown of the spend across the department is set out in paragraph 8. The biggest area of spend within H&T resourcing there, which really relates to our mainstream school and SEN transport, is a big chunk of that spend, but I'll come on to more detail on some of those budget lines. Paragraph 9 covers budget adjustments, and we have seen 4.2 million additional funding to cover operational contract inflation. You know, that's been a major issue for us in the past year, and 2.8 million to cover pay award increase. In terms of growth for highways and transport, that's been significant, and you can see that over the MTFS period. It rises from 1.3 million to 7 million by the end of the 4 years. Main driver for this is the growth in SEN transport costs. We're seeing annual increases in the numbers coming through for SEN transport, and that sits at round about between 6 and 8% each year. So for each year of the MTFS period, we're seeing that growth in numbers. We're also seeing increasing complexity, which adds to cost. And also then, that's then compounded in terms of the increasing contract costs we're seeing through inflation being driven through fuel costs and labour costs. Another dilemma and difficulty we're having is we're seeing as a result of that situation is the number of contract handbacks. So we're going out to the market again and seeing even higher costs coming back with that. In terms of savings, take you on to paragraph 16. The profile for the department starts at just under 400,000 in the coming financial year, rising to 1.7 million in 26-27. If I just pick out some of the main areas, while we've just talked about the level of growth in SAN transport, we are targeting that for savings as well. However, in the early part of the MTFS, you'll see that 710,000 has actually been put back into that budget. That relates to savings that have not been achieved to date because of the difficult circumstances in the market. That inflationary element, etc., has meant we haven't been able to deliver the savings that we had previously hoped to. Other areas I'd highlight, we've got 200,000 saving on our subsidised bus spend there, and we're looking at options for phased savings up to potentially $500,000 on a park and ride subsidy. The other large saving element you'll see in that table is street lighting, where we're looking again at a number of options from more minor to more radical across the MTFS period. What I would say across these is there's an awful lot of work still to be done and iterations to go through, and assuming the MTFS is approved in February, we will be embarking on that work, and it will include things like consultations, etc. So some of these will come back to members before anything is implemented. In terms of our savings under development, these are in effect our pipeline savings. The next ones we'll be working up after we've delivered the ones that we are actively seeking at the moment. We've got a number of those. SAN transport again features in that, and we're looking at a number of options there. Things like potentially transferring the most expensive contracts into in-house fleet. And there's a number of initiatives we're looking at there. In terms of income, we are considering a one-stop shop for developers and maximising the services we could potentially be selling to developers there, things we already do in-house for our own purposes, but developers may want to take us up on that. And making it easy coming into one place and looking across the services developers might want to purchase from us. We're also reviewing our wider fees and charges across the service, because there are a number across a whole host of different service areas under highways and transport. One, a bit more, committee might not be aware, but a few years ago, government brought in legislation to do with something called lane rental, and we'll be looking at the feasibility of that. That's basically where we can charge a utility, or it would be ourselves as well, or a developer, for the time, literally day by day, they're on the road network. It tends to apply only to your higher category roads, your A-class roads, etc., where roadworks cause most disruption. And obviously it's about incentivising the minimum period time that the roadworks need to be there, so you're minimising disruption. We're looking at if there's a business case around that, and it's something we might want to adopt in Leicestershire. But as I say, a long way to go on some of these savings under development. Other factors affecting the delivery of our MTFS, both in controlling growth, delivering on budget, and delivering on savings, are a few things I just want to highlight to you. Retention and recruitment of staff has been a real challenge for us across the service over the last year, and continues to be so. Put simply, we don't pay quite as well as many other sectors that are competing for the same skills we need. We look at a number of tools to address that, including market premium, retention payments, but at times we also have to bring in agency and consultancy staff to fill essential roles. I've already alluded to the taxi market being difficult, and so is the bus market. You know, recovery post-COVID has not happened. We're not at pre-pandemic levels of passengers, etc. So again, our ability to manage growth in those budgets can be very difficult, and you know, there's ongoing pressures there. The maintenance funding we get from the Department of Transport is likely to change from 2024, and with an element of that being top sliced and related to your performance across a whole host of areas. So depending on how we do on those performance indicators will depend on, you know, how much we do or don't get for some things like for our highway maintenance activities. And the final thing I would say before I stop on the revenue side, paragraph 29 sets out sources of some of the other funding we get into those highway and transport budgets. There, income from developer agreements, capitalising against staff, working on our capital projects, and a whole host of other kind of income recharge sources that add to our net position. Happy to stop there and take questions relating to the revenue side of highways and transport, Chair.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you to you and your officers for, again, another very good report, and for all the clarity to the questions that were raised this morning on the Chairman's brief. I'll now open this up to members. If any members have got anything to say, please indicate and let me know. Councillor Bill.
Challenge, you know, addressing this challenge in a most competent way. Just a couple of observations that occur to me. First of all, the this growth in the SEN transport. I think a casual observer to our proceedings would be surprised to learn that the biggest hit, if you like, on highways and transportation is this cost of cost of transporting these youngsters. We know it has to be done, and it's a task that everybody on the county council accepts has to be done. It's just surprising that it all lands on to so much of it lands on in this department. I do wonder, also thinking about it, that the fact that we're the lowest funded county council in the country, the costs of services such as this are must hit us much stronger, much harder than those in more better funded parts of the country. It strikes me as it just adds to the unfairness, really, that that we face. I think the biggest challenges actually in this budget are the challenges of the probable threat to the bus services. The further withdrawal of subsidies has to be the most painful area that will hit members and the people that members, all the people that we represent. I think that's the hardest one. I hope that actually that we will not have to see further reductions in the lighting that we discussed this morning. I know that's an option being considered. It's one thing dimming the lights, and I think that people will accept that. But to lose further hours, I think would be that would be uncomfortable. Anyway, they're my initial observations, Chairman.
Oh, okay, thank you very much, Councillor Bill. And I'm sure Anne said this morning, she said again just a couple of minutes ago, that these are items that are being looked at. Nothing's confirmed yet, and anything that will be decided upon, I'm assuming you've said, will come back to scrutiny and cabinet. Am I correct?
Certainly some of those bigger aspects of the savings plan will have to, because it would involve things, we'd have to go through process like consultation. So some of them will. Some are more business as usual, but definitely those more significant ones.
Thank you. I've now got Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, obviously, Mr. Bill's just pointed out there that SEND is obviously the biggest growth area, and unfortunately, we've got a cross here between two departments with the CFS. So it's important to people to understand that obviously the demand in the Children and Family Service, it's growing exponentially year on year, and that's because there's fundamentally not enough placements within mainstream schools. So in turn, we have to send them to specialist schools that then require transport, specialist transport. So obviously we're working towards it within the Children and Families Department of reducing that demand, and we've got a programme in place called Transform Send and Inclusion, TISL. Can you tell me how you've envisaged that changing the demand for your services as that gets implemented in the next couple of years, please?
No, you're absolutely right. One of the factors, I wouldn't say it was the only one, but one of the factors is the availability of local places. Now, obviously, needs can be on a spectrum and different complexities, you know, so the more specialist facilities we have in the county, obviously the less, you know, transport we're having, or less distance transport we're having to do. For some instances, we often have to transport children outside the county because we don't have the facilities inside the county. So that obviously helps as well. But I think beyond that, there is a national trend of rising numbers coming through anyway. So it's not just about the, you know, there seem to be more designated EHCPs, you know, that education, care and health plan. There more and more are coming through. So it's an ongoing challenge in terms of being able to deal with those numbers and provide within the county. And it's certainly a national problem. I was on a call yesterday with the Association of Directors of Environment, Economy, Planning and Transport and the Association of Directors of Children's Services, because we recognise this from all aspects, from the end-to-end part of the service, the rate of growth and how we then deal with that and the impacts on budgets is phenomenal. And as I say, that's a national issue. So, you know, we're discussing what we can do as local authorities and what we want to take to government to how do we begin to really manage this demand and the significant growth we've got in it.
I've now got two councillors left to speak, and I'll go in the order they were raised. So, Councillor Fillmore.
Thank you, Chair. Similar theme, really, yeah, the numbers are scary. It's as simple as that. And by default, I kind of have insight into what's going on in the background. And I guess there's two parts to my question. One is, yeah, we're jumping from 1.3 plus the overspend to 7 in 3.5 years, which is huge increase. Do we have any assessment, insight, understanding? You know, our population will grow, you know, by default. Have we got any understanding at all of where that 7 million might get to over the 5-year, 7-year term? The other side of that equation, and it very much feeds into the logistics point of getting children to the places, the available spaces. Last I heard, we were building 600 new SEND places across our school estates, and therefore, in theory, more local places will become available over time, and therefore the distance of transportation should, in theory, start to reverse itself at some point. In theory, have we got any understanding at all about how the SEN transport budget might look in the future? Are we just going to, I know it's a very big crystal ball, this one, Anne, but you know, that jump from 1.3 plus overspend to 7 is huge, and it would be seriously challenging if the following 3-4 years sees the same percentage jumps. You know, that would be incredibly difficult to manage. So I'm just curious if you've got any crystal ball visions on what it might look like as those 600 extra spaces come on stream. Thank you, Chair.
I certainly don't have a figure for you, but a few things that, you know, thoughts that come to mind. Last year's growth was 12%. So, you know, You can take what you want with that. We're in very difficult times. We work with the forecast figures come from the Children and Families Department. They're obviously looking at, population forecast, the ONS data, etc., factoring that in. And then there's another equation that needs to come into that in terms of percentage of you would expect SEN coming through your population. Now, there's a national trend of increasing designations of EHCP. So there's something there. Is it more diagnosis? Is what's coming through and what is that trend? So there's a confidence in what's happening with your population growth. And as we all know, there's a big growth agenda and lots more housing coming, which means more population, etc. But on top of that, you're layering in what your forecast is in terms of that SEN proportion of the population. So we can only just work with Children's to understand their forecast. They are the ones that do that because they're providing the SEN provision. And as you say, what specialist provision, where's that needed in the county? What's the best way to split up the money to provide that? So factors in terms of the growth, that's the first one about your forecasting. You've also got things like the market, things we're less able to forecast. What's going to happen with inflation? What's happening with taxi licensing that's going to drive the market? What can we do to expand that? Because it's a limited market, and often specialist taxis that can take large size wheelchairs are very limited. How do we expand on that? Because the less supply, the greater the cost every time we put a contract out. Then we've got a balance to, are we better bringing in-house to our own fleet? What's the cost of operating that? Could we do it cheaper? What's the cost of us getting that specialist provision and doing it? What's the difficulties in getting drivers? And you all know we've been hit hard recently. There's so many factors at play. I guess what I wouldn't be willing to do is to say the growth figures are going to go down in the short term. I think we're going to see year-on-year growth. Hopefully it's the lower end. It's not the 12%. Hopefully it's at the 5-6% or lower. But I think for the short term, and even with more provision, it doesn't come on overnight. And chances are the growth are still outstrip what we're able to provide with our limited funding.
Thank you. So the bit that's just jumped into my mind, and it doesn't need answering today unless somebody specifically knows, is with the SEN placement growth that we are, as in the physical places in schools that we are investing in, does the logistics that you're facing and those transportations feed into where those places are being built? As I say, it's a complicated question. It's just, and members and officers around the table might not know the answer today, but it just sort of springs to mind that if we have particular hotspots or low spots where the transport is more complicated, is there a debate and an argument and a discussion about where those 600 SEN places, physical school places, are provided relative to where our logistical challenges are greatest? Thank you, Joe.
I think the very quick answer to that is probably not. It's very difficult. It's probably it's very difficult because it's a movable feast, isn't there? People will come through the system and move through the system, etc. So it's very hard to know what specialist requirements are needed in what area at a certain time, to know which setting they then go to. But the other aspect, I think, looking at it the other way, and where I think we acknowledge we need to work more closely with our colleagues in Children's, is in looking at EHCP for somebody and designating the specific setting that individual should go to. More consideration should be given to the transport implications of that. And I don't think we're quite maximising out that conversation, and it's somewhere we should be focusing on and looking at in the short term.
Final point. Thank you, Joe. So I'm really pleased to hear that response, and that's really encouraging because, certainly it's my wife who's the SEN expert, not me. But by default, after 25 years of her in it, you kind of learn quite a lot by default. And I would suspect that the provision of the specialist support, whatever that looks like, closer to where somebody lives, will also, and I accept there's parental choice and all that, those things in the background, but I would have expected parents, if their children are settled in a particular area or there's a nice new space for them in a particular, particularly where they live or close to where they live, that would be a preference for them than, you know, their child having to try 15 miles in a taxi to go across border to, because that's where this place is. So I think there's a discussion there amongst officers and lead members to just have a look at, is there a bit more integration we can look at. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Anne.
Councillor Hack.
Or we could have a chat, because I think it goes much further beyond education and transport, because certainly some of the issues that I've picked up have been district council housing allocations, and therefore you have a scenario where there's the demand and they try and get a home in a suitable place and the doors are shut. So therefore we could get all of these in place, but actually finding that person a suitable home to live in, particularly if the child has got disabilities that require mobility aids, is a completely different question entirely. So strategically, there's some real strategic thought that I think needs to go ahead about, you know, the society is changing, our demands are changing in terms of children that need special educational needs, and therefore we as strategic authorities need to respond to that challenge. You know, whether or not mainstream is quite what it, who knows? I think there's lots of things to unpick in there. I actually had a quite a different question. SEND, obviously, we've also got a paper on the agenda today around SEND, so I will leave my questions on that to that paper. But I suppose the issue we've got, and we're in this financial situation because we don't have enough money to go around. So we're having to make some really difficult choices. But I can see in the numbers that we've actually allocated that the Park and Ride is going to do some heavy lifting in terms of the savings over time. So we're looking at, in the budget, the way I've read it, it's about £4.5 million of savings once you put growth in and all that kind of stuff. And 1.5 million of that saving over the period of time is coming out of the Park and Ride. So what conversations have gone ahead in terms of how we are going to approach that? And I'm assuming it'll come back to us for scrutiny in terms of more detail, but it's an area that's really been asked to do a lot of the heavy lifting. How are we best able to undertake those conversations?
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, it's not 1.5 million, it's £500,000. That isn't cumulative. Yeah, no, absolutely. But nevertheless, I think your principles, you know, it still absolutely applies. We'll look at a number of different options from, you know, less radical to more radical and work those through in terms of implications and what that might mean. Equally on this one, and just to highlight for committee, all that work will happen in partnership with the City Council, because you'll know the moment that we deliver that service in partnership, we both, you know, fund that between our authorities. So anything we do will be worked up in partnership with those as well. But again, that would be one of the things that would come back to members once we've done that work to say, okay, here's an option that potentially could go forward, or there may be options we want to drop and take off the table. So it very much is a kind of bit of a blank sheet at the moment. And we've got a lot of work to do and hoops to go through. And ultimately, any recommendations would need to come back via members.
Anne, could I ask you to continue on with the report? And I don't know which part you think we're up to, but I haven't been ticking the boxes off as we go down.
I've been paying attention, Chair, thank you.
Yeah.
We're at the capital section, okay, so round about paragraph 30 of your report, yeah. So table 3 in the paragraph 30 there, you'll see our capital programme, and that's substantial at 93 million spent in the coming financial year. That splits down into two aspects. Often people think the capital, you think of the big major schemes. That is a big part of it. That's 71 million. But 21 million is what we call our transport asset management. Basically what you know is highway maintenance, all different aspects of that, the capital spend we do on our highway maintenance. If I look at the those major schemes, however, the biggest one is the Melton Mowbray Distributor Road. I'm sure you're all very familiar with, and that one, subject to the last few hurdles, should start on site in the next couple of months. Sources of our capital funding, that's shown there in table 4 for you. You can see, there's a lot of different areas where we do secure funding from. One point I would caveat, however, the first 2 lines, that DFT funding into maintenance, that's still indicative. We have not yet heard from the department because they're still working out from their settlement from Treasury in December how they're allocating their budgets. And I know there's a lot of difficult decisions going on within DFT about how they do allocate that. In terms of risk in the capital programme, the biggest one for us, no surprise to you, is inflation. The levels of inflation we're seeing on one of our big, major projects there is substantial. It's not small beer. So really, we're looking at that closely. We have to work very carefully on that to try and manage the implications on those major projects. Other things, and I mentioned before, touched on before, the right skills and the people resource is an ongoing challenge for us. Finally, paragraph 39 sets out our future capital requirements, things that we may need to do in future as an authority, not funded at the current time. We do have a budget allocation advanced design element, and that allows us to do the work to design up those potential schemes we think might need funded in future so that it's ready to go in for bidding as and when the government announce funding streams that would be appropriate for them. And also we have an element then that would allow for some match funding, because often, you can't bid for 100% funding, you have to put something towards that. Some of the capital funding goes towards our fleet, and as you know, we're on with trying to green our fleet where that's appropriate. Not all our vehicles, there isn't a green alternative to them, but we've got a programme of doing that, so some of the capital goes towards that. And I think the only final point I would say, in those future proposals, we're only able to fund things when there's appropriate funding streams coming forward. You'll know within the extent and challenges we've got under our NTFS, the authority's ability to fund major schemes going forward just isn't there. So our ability to deliver on infrastructure, etc., improvements across the county is entirely dependent on government funding streams coming forward and us successfully bidding into those. I'll stop, Chair.
Is that on? Yeah, sorry, thank you, Anne. And before I pass it up to members, I have a question, please. In paragraph 35, you mentioned schemes which external funding has been secured, and there's no mention in there of the A511 link road.
Chair, very astute. I said the same question when I read the draft report. It's a technicality in terms of we haven't yet got to a certain stage where DFT, the Department for Transport, has signed that off. We've got the early phases and that, so it's all in train. It's still there. Please don't have a panic attack. Don't panic yet. It is still there. It's an accounting technicality where my finance colleagues were saying to me, technically, the money is not secured, but we're well on our way. It's all looking good. It's still there.
I do read the report. I'll open it to members. Councillor Hack, you want to go?
Thank you, Chair. I read an article the other day, and I read lots of articles, so it could be anything. I know that we, obviously as an authority, we've got lots of fingers in pies in a sense of trying to look at our overall funding position. But there is now a group of authorities that have banded together in terms of capital infrastructure bids, which are starting to hit local authorities' balance sheets really heavily. Melton Distributor Road being one of the big ones for us. Has there been any movement from government recognising that DFT allocations that were agreed 5 years ago are no longer going to allow schemes to go ahead? If we'd made the decision not to fund Melton, that growth is lost. These schemes are infrastructure developments that grow our economy, that allow us to deliver the homes and the businesses we need for the future. So has there been any movement from central government recognising that these pressures are really starting to bite within the local authority network, and what work have we been doing to sort of put our oar in on that as well? Thank you.
No, thanks for the question. In terms of those capital projects, we've had conversations specifically about Melton, but obviously the wider picture as well, in terms of lots of authorities are in exactly the same position as us, really challenged, have got gaps in their funding for major projects that were allocated funding for 3, 4, 5 years ago at a fixed amount. I can't report any positive progress. Unfortunately, the DFT's response is very much, I'm afraid that's your allocation. We've got no more money, which genuinely they haven't. You know, they go to Treasury on a scheme by scheme basis or a programme by programme basis. And unfortunately, at the moment, it's still very much, as a local authority, you are left to manage that risk in terms of ability to plug that gap you've got in your major scheme. I think one of the key things we've tried to point out to government is the funding system is flawed. This thing about outline business case stage, which could be, for instance, taking the Melton Distributor Road as an example, we get allocated that money in 2018. Here we are 5 years later, just about to go on site. But look what's happened in the interim. But that money was fixed in 2018. And it's interesting, Treasury have a graph where they're saying funding certainty through the lifespan of a project. And at OBC stage, outline business stage, where DFT allocate your funding and that is fixed, they say you should expect, Treasury say you should expect 70% variance in your cost at that stage because of the unknowns, because you have not done the level of work that you need to do to get a major project on ground. So Treasury is saying you should expect 70% variance, but DFT is fixing your funding at that point. The funding system is flawed. We've certainly had those conversations with DFT. They do tell us they are looking at it, but unfortunately, I think the way they transact with Treasury, or sorry, Treasury transact with them, they get a fixed amount for a programme and that's it as well. I think the other thing it's worth thinking about is the likes of National Highways. They get a 5-year allocation and they have a programme of works. If their scheme costs increase, which they have, what they do is the projects at the tail end of that programme get shifted into the next programme period. We have no ability to manage our projects like that. Again, it's just, you know, something we put to government worth thinking about, how they might manage funding streams and projects within funding streams. At the moment, all the risk sits with the local authority who's not in a position to fund the gap often.
Just a quick follow-up then. I'm assuming at the point at which we put our application in, there is no expectation within that application that you could put forward for, we know this isn't going to hit the ground running for 5 years. We've built in a standard stock level of inflation of even the you know, government prediction of being 2%, that's their target. Even at 2% from 2018 to now would give, should have perceived some growth in the DFT grant from then to now. Is there no ability to do any of that? I'm assuming there's not, which is why I've asked the question.
It's sort of yes and no on that. We follow, I mean, it's called WebTag. We follow all the government process, the DFT's process about what you are allowed to put in. You are allowed to put in risk. You are allowed to put in an element of contingency. What you're not allowed to put in is something called optimum bias. And a number of years, probably a decade ago, because National Highways at the time, Highways Agency, were overrunning in so many projects, government commissioned a study on why are project costs going up so much. And the outturn of that project was, at setting your budgets, etc., and your forecast, you should add in this thing called optimum bias. In getting a BCR and going through the process of, is this a good project? What's the benefits and the costs? We are not allowed to add in optimum bias, despite the wisdom knowing if you're going to get close to it, you should do that. We're not allowed to do that. It's excluded. We can put in risk. We can put in a contingency. We're not allowed to put in an optimum bias.
Councillor Fillmore.
Thank you, Chair. I need a bit of yours and Anne's indulgence on this one, because I've got this lovely handout here, which I thought we were starting on growth, and then we kind of whipped through the other bits and we've got to capital. So could I, with your indulgence, Chair, ask Anne about savings in ET9, which is community average speed cameras, and you don't need to find it.
Yes, you can.
Thank you very much. So I see the proposal, or no, I rephrase that. It's not even a proposal; it's an idea at the moment. £500,000. as a councillor, and I suspect most of my colleagues all have the same, speed in traffic is probably one of the single biggest items in our inboxes, whether it's real or perceived. And we do know a lot of the speeding is perceived speeding, not real speeding. My instinct is, if there's any way we can continue up to those 14 projects or 14 sets of ASCs, that is something I would like to see. And I guess there's two parts of the question is, one, if we can't grow it to the 14, can we rotate the 7, quicker? So everybody gets a reasonably fair crack of the whip within, their sort of memory time frame. But I guess the other question, and it may be an incalculable one, is, do we know if we deploy average speed cameras, particularly these community ones, does it provide an offset cost benefit? So does it reduce cost implications elsewhere, as in, it won't always be ours, it'll be the police, fire and rescue service, but still our officers have to document it and look at it, and it gets considered in the whole scheme of road safety and. So is there a kind of savings that we can qualify if those ASCs do go out? So it's a big question, and I will now leave it to Anne.
Thank you very much. It's just that saving there is 55,000. That's revenue. That's revenue. And what that is for the ongoing maintenance and calibration of the cameras. So the fact that we're not extending from the 7 sites we've got to the 14, we're saving on the revenue, the calibration costs of those, that capital cost of the new cameras. So, okay, back to your next question then. Can we, assuming we've only got, and I absolutely understand the desire to keep that expanded and, how much communities want these, absolutely understand that. But, as you know, this is a financially challenged situation. If we just retain the 7 as existing at the moment, we don't rotate those. We put those in as the kind of initial pilot for them, and we didn't do on a basis of rotating. I think, however, it's something that we need to be considering, given that we're now no longer extending that, because we had hoped to extend to 14, and those additional sites would then get rotated after a while. But that would be something we'd need to discuss with members, because obviously those communities that have them, I think, very much value them. We hadn't put them in on the understanding that, they would only have them for a short period of time, etc. We need to consider that, but it's something that's probably worthwhile discussing with members if we wanted to go down that route.
Yes, please. No, just yes, please. Can members discuss it? And I think having the ability to move them around, which I thought was part of that programme, would for me be extremely viable. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a quick follow-on from that, it might be useful if we could have confirmation after the meeting where the 7 that are going to proceed are, and where the ones which probably aren't are, just for sort of reference if possible.
They're already in and operating, the 7. They've been in for probably 2-3 years, probably pre-pandemic they've been in. They're already operating, but we'll certainly provide a list for you just as a reminder. Apologies, Chair, I didn't answer the aspect of the question about is there a saving elsewhere. Overall, and we did do, in terms of funding these cameras, because it was the County Council that's funded them, we did try very hard lobbying Treasury, and we even had a meeting with, it was Robert Jenrick at the time when he was in Treasury. We did have a meeting with him in London, myself and the leader and the MP, and to talk about funding, because unfortunately the fines go back to central government. We asked for hypothecation just even to allow us to pay for the capital cost of the camera, after which anything else would then go back to Treasury. We have never, ever been able to convince them of, that approach. So there isn't a funding thing. Now, whether there's net savings because we don't do other traffic management, we've never done that causal street. thing, but what I would say about these cameras are they tend to be ones where they don't fit the criteria. There isn't actually a speeding issue. It's a community perception, and we all get how important community perception is about safety, which is why we were keen to roll these out further. But there isn't many of the sites don't meet the key criteria that the police would, and we would work with the police through the road safety partnership, where say mobile cameras we go, etc. So chances are we wouldn't necessarily have put any traffic management measures in, because I'm sure, as many members know, we do have criteria, because we've got limited funding, about where we will spend money. So I suspect it would be, a low offset in terms of that net position.
Councillor O'Shea, you've raised your hand.
I was just going to come back. The actual ones that are fixed at the present time, to actually move them around would be a substantial amount of money to even dismantle them and to move them. So I don't think it'd be cost effective personally.
There would be a cost.
There'd be quite a heavy cost to move them, because they're in fixed positions.
Councillor Bill.
Chairman, I've concentrated on these speed cameras through my members fund. I think it's taken us about 2 years now to actually get the posts up at various places, and we're looking forward to the time when we can actually put the device on top of the poles and something's going to happen. It's sure, MVAT, I'm sure that's going to happen one day, but I'm surprised how long it's taken. Looking at Appendix C, if I can take that as my text for this afternoon, it's obvious that of the total, most of the money is going into Melton Mowbray in one form or another, and a principle that's been followed by our friends in the Department of Levelling Up. Also seen Melton Mowbray as the priority for the whole county, and good luck to them. It's a lovely town, Melton, and I'm really pleased for them. Oh yes, and apart from that, we've got the Hinckley Hub scheme, which was very controversial, but I'm delighted to say it takes about 30 seconds off my trip from Sainsbury's back home. So I'm grateful for that. I was rather amused to hear Andy Street saying that no money is going into the West Midlands from the Levelling Up Fund. And I thought, well, if he's complaining, what have we got to? Where does that leave us? Because the amount of levelling up money that's actually come into the Midlands as a whole, as far as Warwickshire or Leicestershire is concerned, is very thin indeed. And we heard this morning about the amount of effort that has to be put into making these bids. And there has to be millions spent across the country on putting in bids to this for capital funding, where nothing has actually come out of it. So there's something seriously wrong with the whole system. And I think it's all part of this system, that it's all part of this situation where Leicestershire is the lowest funded area for funding of everything. And the levelling up thing has just underlined this message. The system has to change, because we should have systems.
Councillor, can I interrupt? I totally understand your frustrations. We're all very frustrated about the levelling up money not coming to us. Yeah. But we're not. This meeting's not about to discuss the levelling up fund. If you've got an issue about anything on the agenda, could you please raise it?
Well, the issue is, of course, that this is a very. These are all very worthwhile schemes, but the amount of schemes we're seeing being put into the county seem to be shrinking rather than growing, and it's just an observation on the situation that we find ourselves in. Thank you, Chairman.
Any other questions? I pressed the press sticker and not the button. So according to me, you've finished your presentation. I'd like to thank you very much for that. Again, always very good answers to everybody's questions. We're not asked to vote on anything here. We're just asked to note the report. So I take it the report is noted. Agreed. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 9 and the Leicestershire Highway Design Full Guide Refresh. I wouldn't wish this job on, on anybody, really. It sounds like it's a long-awaited job, but it's set out in the agenda on pages 27 to 60, and Jana will present this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Everybody hear me okay? Brilliant. Okay. So the purpose of this report really is to seek your comments as Scrutiny Committee on the work we're doing to undertake the full refresh of the Leicestershire Highways Design Guide. So this is really a collection of documents that provides guidance for developers coming into Leicestershire to build houses, employment sites, and how they interact with the highways network. And it's really what helps us provide a basis for the planning observations that we send back to planning authorities when we're consulted on a new development coming forward. So as part of this is part of an engagement exercise that we're undertaking on our overarching policy and principles, which we're under development. So they're not finalised, they're being worked through, and there are lots of consequences that arise from changing this policy. We're very conscious of that, and why we are keen to get comments from yourselves and indeed other stakeholders as well. Turning to the report itself, I'm just going to run through some key parts for you, but of course we'll take questions afterwards. So just a bit of background. At the moment we're working on an interim design guide, which we updated for things that were urgently out of date, like references to legislation and guidance, some technical matters that are agreed, but clearly not matters of policy. So we did that work and we published that earlier. Well, not earlier this year, it was last year now in 2022. So now we're into the meaty stuff, as the chairman said today, this is a big piece of work, and it really does need to be taken in the context of a changing kind of policy and financial framework that we're now working within. So there's numerous changes to national policy and guidance, such as the updated NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework. We've had new active travel guidance. Some of you here may be familiar with the local transport note LTM 120, which kind of sets a standard for active travel infrastructure. And again, those of you familiar with planning, there's a lot of emphasis on beautiful places, placemaking, and environmental sustainability. I always laugh that you can take the word beautiful and ask people to describe it, and they will give you entirely different things. And that's the kind of challenge we're dealing with in trying to support those agendas when we're looking at development in Leicestershire. There's also the council's commitment to become net zero authority by 2030 and for the county to be net zero by 2045. And we'll need to consider the role of this design guide in helping deliver on that commitment, but at the same time managing the risk and impact on budgets for maintaining adopted highway. Because our budgets are significantly decreasing in real terms sort of year on year. And so the delivery of these aspirations may involve risk, particularly with new technology, and we need to balance that within the guide. So as the local highway authority, we're really supportive of those aspirations and agendas. And I've said really before that this document then represents one big balancing act of all of those factors in supporting development and continue to deliver safe and a properly functioning highway network that's affordable to maintain in the future. And in this context, sorry, Chair, I should just clarify that when we're talking about highway assets, that's everything that forms part of the highway, not just sort of your road surface. It could be street lighting, pavements. There's a number of what we would term assets that are covered by the design guide. So this full refresh then is intended to be a holistic review, looking at everything from the technical guidance through to policy. And the policy aspect's really the first critical step, because they will guide then some of the more technical detail that we get into later. And the highway assets that we'll agree to adopt, that will become our responsibility, and thinking about those, how we apply our commuted sums policy, and that is where we take an amount of money to help maintain our highway network going forward, and that's influenced by the type of asset it is and the materials used to construct it. Clearly, road safety, access to the network remain key parts of the design guide, and also this sort of facilitation role in placemaking, and a route to net zero be absolutely critical to that policy. So one of the key things around the work that we've done so far is this debate around commuted sums. So making sure that we can afford to maintain the network that we're taking on in the long term. And there's a work in the appendices to this report about the options that are considered, and we are currently testing options that look at the current schedule, what could be included, and also understanding the potential impact of seeking contributions for standard materials. And that option is not one that's traditionally been accepted, kind of with other highway authorities, and it is currently probably not best practice in terms of national commuted sum guidance, but we thought we needed to look at that in the context of all of the challenges before we dismiss it, particularly because at the other end of the scale, and you'll see from the report that we weren't looking to reduce the number, particularly to reduce adoption of highway network from where we are now, because we didn't feel it addressed the financial concerns. We thought perhaps open up for more legal petitions to adopt the road, but also because it's not in the interests of residents of new developments and communities particularly. So we wanted to kind of make sure that we're considering all of the ways that we can continue to support that. And other highway authorities are doing the same thing. My colleagues in other authorities are looking at things around street lighting and highway lighting the highway in different areas where they continue to adopt street lighting for those purposes, as an example. So the other things then we're looking at are around the standard palette of materials that we would allow on the network. This makes sure that they're kind of going to last, they're not going to fall apart, that they perform their function appropriately and don't leave us with a huge maintenance burden. It also is an opportunity to consider that environmental sustainability. There will be new materials come out that could be potentially much better, have a much smaller carbon footprint. We want to be able to be involved in that, but at the same time we don't want to take all of that risk on ourselves up front. Perhaps share that appropriately with developers and other stakeholders so that we can make really good progress on that environmental agenda. So then there's a set of principles that are appended to this report, and they form the basis of the guide, and we're again seeking feedback on those. They're set out in the report from paragraph 44, and they cover kind of key issues. We've talked about road safety, accessibility, environment and sustainability, and design quality as well. And we're obviously the core themes of what we do as a highway authority, we're still committed to those, and safety is our paramount concern. But we will take in board those wider factors as well. And we'll need to sort of think about our aligning our policies that are coming through, looking around asset management and road safety policy that my teams are also working on, and make sure that they're aligned. One of the policies that many of you will be familiar with is the policy Iron 5 that currently we have, that kind of manages access to network, so connecting new roads in, and we will need to look at that in the context of what we're seeing at appeal decisions, but also in terms of making sure that roads are used appropriately, and there's a risk-based assessment to accessing new connections onto the road. That will take on board things like traffic volumes and highway sort of purpose, what type of vehicles are using it, is it on a school route, that type of thing. So you can probably tell from all of the things that I've been talking about that it's not just us as a highway authority that's going to be interested in what we're doing here. It may look like a dry document if you try to read it all in one go, but it does have a lot of uses for a lot of different people. And we're really keen to engage with stakeholders on these issues, particularly the local planning authorities and developers. And we're doing that prior to consultation so that we don't come up with things that we could sort of avoid abortive work by having those discussions early. And they are likely to be difficult and contentious, in terms of finding that balance between all interested parties. If you think about increasing costs for developers, that will impact on viability, or perhaps design guides that planning authorities want to have for specific developments, and the materials and things that be involved in that. So we'll have reference groups and focus groups that will deal with those specific issues. We'll also be looking at making sure our equality information is good, that we're engaging with equality groups and statutory planning consultees. So we're underway with a Equality and Human Rights impact assessment as part of that, and also a strategic environmental assessment. So in summary, really, there's a good few months of hard work ahead to kind of pull all this together, and it is surprisingly wide-ranging document once you start to get into it. But we're hoping then we've got a very enthusiastic team. We've found that it's really important that in-house the team that are going to be using this document regularly are really engaged in it and providing feedback on where they think the risks are, how easy it'll be to use in practice. So we're doing that work in-house alongside other stuff. So we're thinking it'll probably be the autumn before we can come back with draft guide that then for kind of approval through the usual processes. But the team are keen and dedicated to it, and I think again it's really important for some of those wider agendas that we've spoken about and we often speak to you about, that the design guide is updated to reflect that. And there's some more detail in Appendix A about the principles and policies, and then there's some kind of a record of our assessment so far on the commuted sums options in the other two appendices as well. So I'll probably stop there, Chair, if you're all still awake, and I can answer some questions if there are any.
I don't know. I was looking around. Everybody's still away. I'll just take.
Excellent.
I'll go first if that's okay. I've taken note of people who want to go. So first of all, I'd like to thank you for your report. Very comprehensive. And I do like paragraph 53, the consultation with local planning departments from district councils. And North West Leicester District Council might not like me for this, but I'd like to volunteer all of their resources they've got if you want any help. And I'll speak to Chris and Ian when I get back tonight. But I do think we need to get this right, because it causes us, we're the biggest growing district council, and we've got massive build all the time, and we have problems all of the time with developers, our planning department, county council highways. We need to get it right, and it all seems to point to this document. So my question for you is, you mentioned that other authorities are doing the same. We're not the only county council in the country. Can we not split the workload down and break it up into 4 component parts and dish it out with 4 councils, and everybody come together at the end of the day, like a benchmarking type thing, save time, effort and resources? And then if you can answer that, I'll...
Oh, sorry, I lost you after if you can answer that. Is it for me to come in there? Sorry,
yes,
Chair.
please, if you could answer that question about sharing the workload.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question actually in relation to this document, because it did used to be a 6 C's design guide, 6 counties design guide that we did pull together. And I think the partnership around that did sort of move away from that joint work, as I think more flexibility came into that agenda in terms of standards and placemaking. We were keen really that Leicestershire had some autonomy over those decisions. I think as well, perhaps at the time, there was city and county authorities in there, and I think we're seeing particularly on the active travel agendas and that type of thing, that and public transport, that different standards perhaps not that there's a mix, there's always a mix in an area, but you'd prioritise different things in sort of where the overarching sort of feel of a place is urban or rural or that type of thing. That said, we are absolutely trying to reduce workload by I'll say shamelessly pinching best practice from elsewhere. So if somebody else has got a chapter or something that works and that we can take inspiration from or work with them, and we are informally working with other authorities in one of those focus groups to input into that, to make sure, because the other thing as well is it actually works better for everybody, and the designers and consultants from developers will provide better submissions to us if they're clear on the process and criteria, and they're not doing something very different for each authority. And I think we could all benefit from that. But at the moment, we've not got a kind of formal arrangement with other authorities to produce that document. And I think if we were to introduce that now, we'd probably find that took us a little bit longer. But I do absolutely appreciate, sharing the workload, sharing knowledge is fundamentally the right way to go. And we're trying to bring that in, but in perhaps a slightly different way than we've done when we had the formal partnership around it.
Thank you. In my industry, we call it stealing with pride. I'll now open it to fellow councillors, and we'll go my right to left. Councillor Fillmore, you raised your hand.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points really for me. So I think full refresh, absolutely. Today isn't yesterday, and tomorrow definitely won't be today. So I do think we need to look very carefully and very widely at what the future might look like. So yes, Section 106, community sums, absolutely maximise the opportunity with that. And indeed, I'd say look at the widest possible use of that. If the impact's 2 miles down the road, then that's where the funding should wind up, not necessarily where the built development is. Just a pure technical observation. Our objectives of net zero, you have both 2045 and 2050 in this document, or in the document as it sits today. So either one's right or one's wrong, I suggest. So it's just minor detail. If this is going to be a safe record, then it just needs tidying up. What I'm really interested in, and design guide, absolutely. So in my division, I have a relatively new build where the road is built to, as I understand it, the minimum adoptable width. And it's not just the bane of my life, it's the bane of the residents' life, because it's too narrow. Basically, it's as simple as that. It may be the minimum adoptable width, but it is fundamentally too narrow. I'm originally from the Millfield side of Braunston, and you drive around there and the roads are just much wider, they're much more accommodating. Kingsway's still a bit tight here and there, but so I think there's a really important point for me in the new builds that we actually do consider what is a practical minimum adoptable width, not necessarily what is the technical adoptable width minimum. So if we could look at that. And then I think the other one for me is it possible to look at how road and footways are designed that we try and prevent or stop or minimise pavement parking? It is an absolute nightmare. Now, we know there's too many cars on the road and all those other good stories or bad stories, but fundamentally, the amount of people who cannot get a pushchair by because, and we know it's a reportable offence and an enforceable offence and, but actually the enforcement mechanism doesn't work that well. And I just wonder if you're looking at the whole of the design guide and the process and the technical detail, is there an opportunity to look at, is there a way of designing the relationship between the actual road itself and the footway that it will never prevent but deters pavement parking? So I'll leave that one with you. Thank you, Chair.
If you could answer that, please. The two questions there, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so in terms of the minimum road width, I think in terms of that specific example, let's check that is what's actually been built, because sometimes, as with all things, people promise us they're going to do something and not. But again, I think that context around having some policy backing and an adopted policy backing for that, what's the road going to be used for, what's the practical thing is absolutely what we need. And so I think that's a really valid comment from this committee for us to take forward in looking at that and working with our planning authority colleagues to do it. I think in terms of the question around pavement parking, it is incredibly difficult, isn't it? If you look at new estates and the requirements that are in there is off-road parking quite often in kind of sort of behind the houses, off the side, and people will still park right outside their house because that's where they want to on the pavement. So I think, and I've taken part in design workshops in the past with my planning colleagues as well to think about how we can do that. I think in terms of layouts and new developments, we can certainly have a go at it. One of the interesting things about having a bit of pavement parking is it does tend to reduce speed through development as well. So there's, as with, it's pretty much my my buzzword for today, isn't it? Balance in there. So we need to have a think about that. But I think the key things for me is, if in theory, if we're getting development right in the right places, there's a place for the car, absolutely. But there will also be people who are conscious of that walking, that walking facility needs to be there, it's well used, and that's mixed into how the development comes forward. So I'd probably have to defer to kind of design experts on how you design that out of places, but it's certainly something that we can pick up. I think it's much harder where you're talking about development on sort of brownfield sites, you know, where that constrained infrastructure you're building within that and it's already there. But again, I'm more than happy to take that as something that this committee has asked us to at least consider in drafting the new guide.
Yep, that's great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for the report, Jenna. I've got 2 points. So the first one follows on from Councillor Fillmore, again, the on-street parking, in particular where you have grass verges. In theory, they're great and look really good on the sort of images you see at planning committee, but in practicality, they can be quite a bit of a nightmare, especially for the residents who are then walking through the mud. So if there's some kind of technical way of stopping people doing it, I don't know, a sump ripper or something, that would be great. You do it the once and you learn your lesson almost. So if there's an opportunity to have a look at that, that'd be great. And the other one, again, is probably a request for when we're into the detail part of it, which I'm sure everyone on planning will be able to relate to, and that's garages. Now, my understanding is there's not actually no defined minimum specs for a garage. It's basically taken as a parking space as defined in the guide. And that definition dates back to about 1973. Cars have changed quite a bit. If we could use the review as an opportunity to actually put in place some minimum dimensions where you can not only get the car in, but you can actually open a door, that would be fantastic, because otherwise we're not building garages, we're building storerooms with a big door on it. So, and obviously if you can't get your car in, those people are then off on the pavement parking and it's just a vicious circle. So that hopefully might be an easy win and would be much appreciated by residents and planners alike. Thank you.
No problem.
Councillor Allen, if I could just put your mind at ease with your second point, it was discussed at length this morning on the chairman's pre-brief raised by Councillor Bill, and Anne and the team are fully aware of that and they've been asked to look at that. With regards to your first point about parking on verges, it's called Dragon's Teeth, and if you come to the village of Ellistown, all of our lovely grass verges which were being parked on and trashed have now got big boulders donated by the local quarry free of charge. We just had to pay for delivery cost. Thank you. Parish land, I may add. Thank you. And before you have a heart attack, it's parish land.
I heard a few. You've covered some already. If we could see a little bit more emphasis on walking. I mean, obviously, one of the things that we talk a lot about cycling, we talk a lot about active travel, but actually, you know, pavement parking does hinder people from getting out and walking about, whether they're pushchairs or mobility scooters or whatever, however people are moving around. I think if we can focus on how we encourage people to use their pavements, that'd be fabulous. But one of the things I have noticed, and even, you know, my estate's over 20 years old now, it was quite fashionable and still continues to be to create new estates with no pavements. And the verge goes right to the end of the road, which creates this scenario of where do we actually park? Are there any standards in terms of pavements? Because there seems to be a little bit of a hodgepodge and it looks a bit messy and untidy after a certain amount of time. One of the things that I brought forward as a motion a little while ago was around installation of masts on highway land. The 5G masts are going all over the place. I appreciate it's a permitted development, but it's something that really bothers local residents. And actually, when we were looking at the cycling and walking route from Lubbockthorpe through to the back end of Elston Meadows, there is a mast that's in Thorpe Astley that now only means that the pavement is only just wide enough for the cycling and walking, because of where this has been plonked. There's no real strategic view of actually where these should go on the highway. Of course, we need infrastructure and that's really important. But in light of that particular mass, it could have gone just set back from the highway and been nowhere near as problematic as it could have been. So I suppose for us is what happens within this document about the installation of street furniture that does cause a real nuisance on the pavement, because that's what's starting to happen, because it's permitted development. They essentially they look on a map and go, oh yeah, we'll pop it there, with no real thought about how that might affect local people. It's just what's going to get the strongest signal, and that seems to be in a bit of conflict. I don't know if there's any reference we'd make to that. The last thing is unadopted roads. We have loads of them, and we recognise there's loads of them. We know that why that happens. But when we're looking at planning consultation processes for the highways don't look at adopted roads as such. And certainly that's been my experience. I've got a few unadopted roads in my division. And later on in the process, and a new industrial unit will go in, it'll travel across an unadopted road, and all their residents going, our road has been really well looked after all this time, and now it's full of potholes because it's HGV vehicles over an unadopted road, and it causes so much hassle. I appreciate they don't belong to us, but the highway network, we've got a responsibility and a duty over the network itself, making sure A to B is still served well. So how do we support our local residents who live in areas with unadopted roads on highway consultation? And how could we do that through this document that at least encourages the planning department to be really clear when they do their consultation that those residents have to make sense and respond on the highway, because the Highways Authority won't, because I think there's a bit of a gap there. And my big example is on Hazel Drive in Braunston. The Audi dealership was put on them. The back of the road is unadopted, and they have transporters day in, day out. It's stopping now, but because it's for loading, they're allowed to use the highway. It's a 7.5 ton restriction, but those poor residents have it all day long, and their road is unadopted, so it's potholed and they have to repair it themselves. So how can we support residents with unadopted roads to support them to maintain their highway, and how do we keep them in good condition? And I don't know if this is really for this, but it feels to me a bit of a design standard and a bit of a gap between what we're responsible as Highways Authority and how we support residents who are responsible for their own highway in front of the front door. How do we bridge that gap for them? Because that's a real area of contention, and it'd be something that all councils will have increasing in their division because of our policy on not adopting. And I think that will continue to cause problems long term.
Could you possibly answer the questions, please? Thank you.
I will definitely give it a go. So in terms of the permitted development, and do come back to me if I miss anything out. So I've tried to make some notes as we go. In terms of permitted development, I think there is certainly scope for us to put some guidance that we ask those who have the permitted development rights to take account of. And particularly, I think that point about inhibiting walking, cycling infrastructure in the future is really important. We've worked on schemes before where it could all work until you get to this really awkward pinch point, and it kind of ruins the scheme because you don't have that network. I can't promise you that I can make anybody listen to it where they have those rights, but I think certainly something that we could look at putting some guidance in, and we could also provide guidance or a FAQs type thing to planning authorities if they were interested in working with us on that as well. So I think we certainly take that away and look at how we can do that. In terms of the unadopted roads question, I think it's really interesting. So first and foremost, and I don't know, you may be aware that there's actually been quite a lot around the legal advice provided to residents on unadopted roads, and making sure that they are aware when they purchase their house that they're on an unadopted road. I always find it amazing that they didn't get that update as some of the things you do find out when you buy a house. But so I think first and foremost, that evidence is that advice is being improved by the Law Society, and I think that's really key in terms of future decisions. I think again, if the planning authority is interested in working with us on a kind of bit of standard wording or something that we could use to do that, because I think part of the question, if you change the use of a highway, a road to be from purely residential that benefits maybe 3 or 4 houses to something that is now providing employment opportunities and other things. There does need to be consideration for the way in which that will be maintained if it isn't public highway. So again, as part of these focus groups, I'm happy to kind of take that as a topic and see if there's anything that we can do. But sort of fundamentally, we won't. If it's not highway, we won't be doing that. And there are probably worth mentioning actually that the road has to be offered for adoption as well. So there are some developers who would prefer not to build to adoptable standards and manage that through a different process. And as you say, that might change of use over time, that might not have been intended for that. So we could probably work with planning colleagues to see if there's anything we can do to offer advice to either residents or themselves in those situations. But certainly, obviously, we won't be taking responsibility for that maintenance where it isn't public highway. But I think the process of putting this together certainly provides a good conversation there, if that's helpful.
Thank you. Councillor Bill.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I very much agree with everything that's been said this afternoon on this. I think it's only going to work if there's if districts and county work together to a common guidelines, common protocol. I know we're a two-tier authority and likely to remain so for the time being anyway, but this is so important that unless we all work together, the problems are going to continue. I mean, you offered North West Leicestershire's resources, and I'd like to do the same for Hinckley and Bosworth. But I know how our members, how strongly we all feel about these. And the members really would like to get involved. Members at district level as well as county level would really like to get involved with the formulation of whatever we're putting together. I mean, just picking up a few things I've made a note of. Unadopted roads, we've discussed that. Advice to householders. I don't think the initial householders will take much notice. They're so keen on getting in and getting on with their lives that the small print that might be written in by a lawyer, you dismiss that because you got so much else to concentrate on, and then you sell the house anyway. And does that advice pass on to the next person? And so it's lost. Developers don't necessarily complete the work that they're meant to be doing. We've got estates in Hinckley and Bosworth where they've gone away 10 years, 20 years, and we're still waiting for them to complete the work. Property maintenance companies are set up. Well, they're the bane of our lives, aren't they? Really, because they try to. Well, we know what the situation is there, and it's not good for the people who are affected. Sewers. We haven't mentioned sewers. You haven't mentioned that this morning. Nobody seems to know who's responsible for the sewers in unadopted areas. It doesn't seem to be anybody's responsibility. I know it belongs to the householders, but the householders don't know it until something goes wrong.
Stop you there? You had a brief this morning, and Anne pointed out that she's briefed you and sent you information on how this process is dealt with on underground services in unadopted roads.
But it's not me that has to be convinced. It's the thousands of people who are sitting on private estates where, they're sitting on that red clay of Leicestershire, which is great until it starts to shrink, and then who knows what's going to happen. So there's all kinds of issues here which I think need to be pulled together in a most serious way. And I wish you luck, Jana, in your efforts. But it's so important what you're doing, and I'm sure all the members here and at district level will give you every support you need to pull together your work on this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bill.
Thank you, Chair. Just one quick follow-on point in terms of the unadopted roads, just as an observation from being on planning committee. Where there is an application that is accessed via an unadopted road, the Highways Department will only comment on the effect from the adopted highway. It might be really helpful if they could just give a view or an opinion on the effect on that unadopted road as well, and take that into consideration in the comments, as opposed to just, well, we don't care about, or we can't comment on that bit. We can just comment on our bit that's adopted. So if we could take a bit more of a holistic view, that might be very helpful to the district planning committees. Thank you, Chair.
Another hand up there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's just one for agenda to take away. So in their design guide and specifications for developers, can we encourage, that's a good word, encourage developers to use as much of the carbon capture technologies that are around when they're building things like curbs? So I'm fairly certain that there is some quite advanced concrete methodology now which actually captures carbon, and actually it should be part of our day-to-day build programs nowadays. So I'll leave that with you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. No more questions? We're not asked to vote on that. We're just asked to note the report, so I can take it that everybody's in agreement. The report is noted, and we'll now move on to item 10, the progress review of flooding scrutiny review, and I think that's over to you, Anne.
Thank you, Chair. This is the second annual update on the recommendations that were made by the Flooding Scrutiny Review Panel when it considered our activities and duties of flooding in 2020. There were 25 recommendations coming out of that review that came to this committee in January 21. We brought an update last year, and this is now the second update and where we've got to on those recommendations. The key areas of update this year are that the local flood risk management strategy is currently being refreshed. That is something that we have been has been on the forward plan for a while, but that's now underway, and we are planning on the timetable of that. We should go out to consultation on that in autumn, so something we will bring to this committee. A key part of that work also will improve a key interactive website, and I think that will be a big improvement from the public's point of view, and all stakeholders interested in that area of work should see a lot of improvement from that one. The Flood Risk Management Board has restarted, and that's got significant action in terms of collaboration across those key agencies. So just having those regular conversations, seeing a lot of progress coming out of that. And they've produced a communication plan to support their work. We've agreed that the County Council, as the lead local flood authority, will be the lead organisation for recovering cells during emergencies, and we've approved our formal flood investigation reports by including timescales for those key actions. Before we weren't too specific on that, whereas now that is included within those reports. A summary of the recommendations and the current position is given in Table 9. Sorry, the table under paragraph 9 in your report. A final point concerns our resourcing. The team is currently in a good position for staffing resource, which is much better than previous years. We have had real challenges in resourcing into those specialist skills we need in those areas. Only caveat being, in terms of the future work programme, as you'll be well aware, when we do have a flooding event and we do get then what triggered Section 19 investigations, that's if a residential property is flooded, our priorities within that team have to change to react to that work, so it can be quite reactive. So we do have a forward programme, but as ever, we're at the mercy of, unfortunately, how much flooding we get and the impact that has. So we have to respond to that. Final point, the report suggests that given that many of the actions are completed and the others are in train, that rather than bring an annual update to you, what we do is we bring specific pieces of work as relevant to the committee, such as the flood risk strategy that's being developed, rather than bringing you an annual update. So this, if you're in agreement, this would be the last annual update, and as I say, you know, it won't be the last time you hear about flooding related work, but in terms of this form, we're proposing that this would be the last report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Anne. Again, thank you for the report. I've got one question, please. Paragraph 9, the table. You've got a lot of the stuff complete, hence I think we're going down, getting rid of the reporting so much, but where you've got item V, flood plans, says it's ongoing and the timescale is ongoing. I'm a bit concerned that the timescale says ongoing. There's no definitive timescale. Like in the first two, you've got autumn 23, summer 2022, etc. Could we have an update as to what the timescale is, please, for that? For the item?
There'll be a number of things that'll be, over different times. So I think they'll probably have put that, in a summarised, concise way. But if you're all right, we could give you a written following this. We could give you a written, more detailed update on that, Chair.
Yes, thank you. So I'll open to the floor and we'll start over this side this time. So, Councillor Hack.
It's just a really, really quick question. My division obviously borders the city, and there are 3 other flood areas that border the city. What continued work are we doing on the city? Clearly, Bronston Lane has had more significant flooding this year, with properties almost breached. The closest it's been for a few years. So what work do we do with our city colleagues where, was obviously the water don't go, oh, this is the boundary, we can't go over there. I just wondered what we were doing with our colleagues over in the city and other authorities to look at this. Thank you.
That board that's been reignited and started again is a key one for the collaboration, and obviously under that then there'll be lots of different work streams of things going on, so it won't always go into the detail at the board, but that's the point of collaboration for that, with key stakeholders, with the water companies, etc. So yes, there will be work going on with that. We do collaborate with city colleagues because, as you say, water respects no boundaries.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back?
So, yeah, yes.
Sorry, just whilst we're on this, I just wanted to obviously just to thank the team for the support that they've given me, particularly on this particular flooding event. The response from Highways has been excellent, and I think it's useful to do that in a public forum, just to put, if you could pass that on to the team, I'd be very grateful. Thank you. Sorry, Chair.
Comments from my right? And people raised their hands, but I didn't write their names down. No comments? Okay, thank you. So again, we just asked to note the report, so I can take it that the report is noted. Agreed. We'll now move on to item 11, which is the Special Educational Needs School Transport Service update, and I'll hand you over to Pat Clark. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of the report is to provide the committee with an update in progress with regards to special education needs transport for academic year 22-23. This is on the back of a previous report that we brought to you in June 22. The report highlights some challenges, but also some benefits that we've seen over the past 6 months, and it also details some positive actions that have been taken, and also indicates some plans for the future. Over the past 12 months, there have been no policy changes, but points 2, 3 and 4 are just to remind the committee on previous decisions. So moving on with regard to the background, in our report in June, we outlined some of the growth expected in SEN transport. These are the base data for this information was from the Children and Family Services. We've already spoken about that here today. But we are forecasting a rise in pupil numbers of 6% in 23-24, 8% in 24-25, and in a rise of 5% in 26 and 27. So you will see that it does fluctuate depending on the information that we are getting from the Children's and Family Services. But that is solely around transport. We also discussed in June the rise in daily costs and the assumptions made in our forecast growth and that of complex users. In November 22, so that was the last time we'd cut off as far as this report was concerned, we were forecasting a 1.4 million overspend, and that was linked to growth, but also the current market conditions and inflation. In June, we highlighted 3 elements of SEN expenditure: demand and growth, pupil need, and the market forces and competition. But we've also received further national information from the County Council's network, and they have also highlighted those as a national problem, but also highlighted a fourth, which is a cost driver around local availability suitable local placements in special schools. So that's exactly what we were talking about earlier on today. So the national data from the CNC report spoke at great length with regards to benchmarking from 16-17 to 21-22. And what there was a 25% increase in pupils using home to school transport services. SEN home to school transport expenditure rose by 33%. The yearly costs of transporting pupils increased by £206 per year. So that was the national picture. So what did we see here in Leicestershire? Well, when we spoke in June, we spoke about the increases that we'd seen in EHCPs. The national picture indicates a 38% increase, but in Leicestershire, we've seen that as high as 54. That has had a knock-on effect, and we've seen a 25% increase in transport needs over the last 2 years. The data sheet in the pack indicates the growth that we've experienced and also what we're forecasting in future years. Leicestershire's costs for SEN transport provision in 2021 year was 5,454 on average. That's against a national cost of 6,099. Pupil needs. So service users, distance travelled and transport costs are really growing. And what we are seeing is, as Anne indicated earlier on, people are having to travel further to go to the educational settings. That in conjunction with complexity as well. Point 17 outlines some of the ways moving forward we are investigating cost reduction provision, and it looks at stuff like trying to pick up pupils in different areas or cluster them together so we can put maximum numbers on board our vehicles. But it is work in progress, and those are the type of things that we'd like to look at going forward. Market forces, points 19 to 20, were highlighted in June. This position did not recover, and we've continued to see that right the way through until November 22. Between the start of the academic year and the end of November, we had 95 contracts handed back to us. These were contracts that were tendered for over the summer period, and operators then turned around to us and said they were unsustainable moving forward. So looking at the positive actions, early last year, the transport team, together with the children's team, really could see that there was an issue forthcoming with the way that the workload was coming through. 338 transport requests were delayed due to incomplete information in EHCPs. 193 applications took longer than 50 days to approve due to missing information. And in December of last year, 19 applications were still waiting for a completed EHCP. Of the eligible pupils that applied on time with all the information received, 91% had transport in place at the beginning of term, and 95% of PTBs were also in place at the beginning of term. Point 23 shows some of the tracking data that we used on a weekly basis to measure what was going on in the service and try and work with our colleagues in children's to understand peak and workflow. We decided to introduce a payment card for some of the families that were affected by the delays in service. 31 families benefited from this scheme, and it was positively received. The introduction of the digital application process gave us a great insight into the expected workload, so the service could understand and work proactively with families that had been affected. We also introduced an improved FAQ so that families could self-serve and reduce the call volumes into our customer contact centre. An improved PTB scheme was issued. This was all delivered around the process to make it easier for people to go through the process and apply for PTBs. Again, positive feedback from that. We also implemented a temporary control hub to handle some of the referred queries and inquiries that had come in, and also some of the complaints that we had received. So there was a real proactive approach as far as transport was concerned. Additional training was given to call handling staff. The graph on point 29 shows a 1 week snapshot, year-on-year comparison between 22 between 2021 and 2022. The customer contact centre's resourcing levels changed also to deal with inquiries. Improvements were made to our electronic mapping system that made it easier and more efficient for us to process information. And in September 22, a transformation project has been initiated to manage demand and drive further efficiencies across the authority. The conclusion to the report . On again? Yeah. Great. So in conclusion, SEN Transport has seen significant growth over the last few years, which aligns with national trends. Despite additional resources challenges this year, management interventions provides a success in maintaining standards of service from June to November. The interventions, however, were resource intensive and therefore very costly, an unsustainable way in the long term for the authority. With growth forecast to continue and in light of the Council's overall financial situation, work within Environment and Transport Department and collaboration right the way across the authority will continue in order to manage demand and drive efficiencies in this service. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. And again, I'd like to thank you and the team for all the work you do behind the scenes and for this report. It's a never-ending job, and it looks like you've been landed in what they call a perfect storm. A rise in everything from fuel to send pupils to requests for send transport, cancellation of contracts and all the rest of it. It's just a moving thing that seems very hard to control. And from this morning's brief, when I asked Anna a question about the 358 transport plans that weren't in place, it seems that you're the end user of all of the information that comes in from many departments across the county and all the rest of it. And some of them, I don't think, understand the speed of which it should be processed to pass it over to you, to enable you and your team to get your job done. Hopefully this will improve in the future. You've done some work that I've seen in here. So again, a big thank you from me, and I'll open up to the members for questions now. And Councillor Smith first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Pat, for the report. Obviously, we can all agree here that SEND's only going to get worse. The demand on SEND, rather, is going to get worse over the next few years, and it's something longer term that could even grow substantially over a much longer period. So I'm quite pleased and encouraged to see within the report that we're now looking at using much larger vehicles. Obviously, each ECHP is different. Every child has got different needs, but a lot of these children are capable of going on bigger vehicles and things like that. So over a longer period of time, that will save the authority a lot of money. But thinking outside the box here, a lot of the children with more complex needs, surely their best method of transportation would be their parents, of which many would have a mobility car or something similar like that. Now, I appreciate that it's different departments, it's government and things like that. Is there anything we could do as an authority to encourage parents to be able to take them to school? And I appreciate every case is very different with other children in the household and so on and so on. But there must be a percentage that we could encourage and thus save the department money.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. You're absolutely right. It is a government and issue with regards to the car that individuals, or the transport that individuals can get from the government schemes. We cannot force people to use them. But what we are encouraging is a little bit more self-help, and the PTBs certainly have been an area that parents can apply for and then take the financial package that comes with that to transport their own children. So that has really helped the authority. It's also helped take some of the pressure off how we're dealing with this. We will continue to do that and try and make it a little bit, continue to try and make it that much easier for people to operate that scheme.
Councillor Hunt. Oh, sorry. I didn't see you raise your hand. Sorry.
I was just going to add to that, if that's all right. Just to be clear, post 16, we do have PTBs, personal travel budgets, where somebody takes an allowance from us and provides their own transport or gets their child there themselves. Post 16, that is our policy is that is mandatory. By default. So that's our approach. However, on the ages up to 16, the government legislation, the national legislation is such that, we are duty bound to provide transport. What we do is we offer voluntary ones. So if it suits the family better to take a personal travel budget, they have that option to do it. But we can't do any more than encourage. And obviously that depends on people's individual circumstances.
So again, I'm putting you on the spot here. What could we do to encourage them to do that? Because it's a huge saving.
Absolutely. I mean, where people come in and talk to us about their needs, we can, have that conversation. What else would make it easy for them to do that? Often it's just out with people's ability, because they don't have a vehicle, they can't drive, they've got another child they have to take somewhere else at the same time, they've got work commitments, there's very fixed things. But we do try and push it, we do try and encourage, and I guess as part of we do, as we've talked about earlier under the MTFS, we have a lot of work streams going on in the SEN area, looking at how we do help manage down this growth and deliver savings. One of them is looking at one potential area we can look at, how do we push things like independent travel training, etc. And again, communications around personal travel budgets, and maybe good news stories about how people have taken them when it works for them, just to help increase awareness and communications around it. But it is all about encouragement. As I say, we don't have the ability to make people take that, under the age group up to 16. It's very much if they're going to do it on a voluntary basis. But we need to look at what we can do to create awareness about, for some people, it will still be an option. So just get them to have that confidence to take the step, and try where it's feasible for them.
Thank you. I mean, I think we've talked an awful lot about special educational needs transport. I think Les hit the nail on the head. Really, is about making sure that the educational provision is as close to the home as possible. When we do that by speeding up the decision-making process. There was a parent in my division, and her child gets transported past the closest special educational need place for them 6 miles away from their home. and she basically said, I want that my child to go there, I would walk them to school, it's not a problem. So I think, you know, that is a real challenge about how do we provide enough places local enough to where people live. And I know in a county the size of Leicestershire, that's not always going to be suitable, but actually reducing the distances is a big part of that. The question I've got is about, and we've spoken about it a lot. So this is sort of more of a public space. Is when we've got lots of turnover of transport providers, is how do you maintain the safety of those children, because it's, you know, special educational needs children are the most vulnerable children, and particularly for some of the real little ones that, you know, 5 and 6 going to school, they're non-verbal, transporting them a long way to a special school is a lot of risk in that. How do we manage that risk, particularly in light of Northamptonshire have had a warning, Derbyshire have had a warning of their transport service. It's an area that's covered with lots of legislation. So how do we do that? And how do we make sure that our little ones in our care are safe? And that I think this is an area that is really important. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. Absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, every single user of our service, that their safety is critical. We do have rigorous risk assessments done on the children, so we understand their needs before they ever get on any of our transport at all. But I think this is one of the big frustrations that currently is out there. When people look at transport, they think that we can just magic a car or go to a local firm and get that transport, and the reality behind it, we just cannot, and we would not. We've got to go through the risk assessments, and we've got to make sure that as we go through the contracting out process, whoever we are contracting out, whichever provider it may be, is fully aware of that child's needs and that they can cater for that child's needs. So it is really, really difficult, but trying to get people into that time scale and that timeline is so important. We cannot put transport on in the morning. If, you know, an EHEP is signed off, it does take us a while to go through that process. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Yeah, just a quickie. I've got a feeling I've asked this before, but I've forgotten the answer. So our not today people. Let's end on a high. Yeah, let's end on a high. No, I haven't, not yet. So our parental responsibility as corporate parent was extended to 25. Does that apply to the Send Transport as well for the PTBs?
Yes, it does. But the PTBs are between the ages of 16 and 18. Anne mentioned earlier on about our change in policy, and that change in policy was around 16 to 18. So at 19, a different set of legislation then kicks in.
Which is? I can see Anne's got the answer.
It's a requirement for us to transport.
18 to 25 or 19 to 25?
19 to 25.
When did that come in? Just out of interest, I'm just thinking of the budget and the implication.
It's always been.
Oh, has it? Oh, okay. Right, okay, thanks for that.
Thank you.
Councillor Hack, another question?
So the Labour group put forward a Mind the Gap motion to raise this with government, because there does seem to be a bit of a gap in the legislation between 16 to 19 and then 19 and above. There is a gap in the legislation, isn't it? And there was a bit of a campaign called Mind the Gap to try and see if we could fix the scenario, because there is a gap in the legislation at the moment.
Again, we're not asked to vote on this, just to note the report. So I take it that the report is noted. Thank you. Date of the next meeting is Thursday, the 9th of March, 2023 at 2 p.m. There are no urgent items. Thank you all very much for attending today's meeting, and I now declare the meeting closed. Thank you. Thank you.